My name is Jon Memmott. I just recently retired as a district court judge after serving 18 years as a district court judge in Utah. A district court in Utah is the highest trial court, and so I have been in the second district in Utah, and I just retired in May after 18 years. Prior to that, I was in the private practice of law for 4 years, and then prior to that, I served as Chief of Staff and Legal Counsel for Governor Bangerter in the state of Utah. Prior to that, I served 8 years as Legislative General Counsel for the Utah Legislature. And then I started my legal career as an Assistant Attorney General down in Arizona in their Trial and Civil Rights Division, dealing with that. I've also taught employment law, HR law, for about the last 31 years at Brigham Young University. So that's a very brief legal background of what I've done in the law. Currently, as of May 1st, I've joined the Arbinger Institute, and they are an organization that has been in existence for about 15 years, dealing with conflict resolution, dispute resolution. And about 4 years ago, I learned about their work and became just mesmerized with what they can do and bring to the legal community and a lot of other areas in terms of civility and conflict resolution, and doing it in a way that is a more peaceful way. I have liked it so much that I've worked with them for the last 4 years, and now I have the opportunity to work with Arbinger and actually lead the work that they're doing in the area of the law. My career started in Arizona, and I had a wonderful opportunity. I had my wife's uncle down there was a Supreme Court justice and took me under the wing, and very early, as a wise old judge who had also been a Superior Court judge and now was sitting on the bench on the Supreme Court of Arizona, during the time I went to law school, sort of took me under his wing and told me a lot about the law, how he grew up learning the law, how the law was practiced, and his love of the law. I grew up in a family where there were no lawyers, and I didn't really know or associate with lawyers before I went to law school, and so for me this was an amazing experience, an amazing man who taught me, Jess Udall, who taught me a real love of the law and all the possibilities that the law could be, and how enjoyable the practice of law could be if you really loved what you were doing, and you could really accomplish some good and some things. And he instilled in me, and that's probably one of the reasons that I became a judge and applied to become a judge, is because, you know, I wanted to practice and love the law the way that he did. But we had the opportunity to come up to Utah, I think in 1976, so a long time ago. And it was during a period of time that the Equal Rights Amendment was and that debate was going across the United States. And so Utah, like many states, were doing studies about the Equal Rights Amendment, about whether they should adopt an Equal Rights Amendment, the pros and cons. And Utah is a fairly conservative state, so it was a pretty heated debate about the Equal Rights Amendment. And because of my prior work in the Civil Rights Division down in Arizona, I was hired by the legislature to do this study on the Equal Rights Amendment and report back to the legislature. And in that process, I discovered that in the original founding documents of the state of Utah in 1896, they had adopted language that was almost identical to the Equal Rights Amendment, and it was part of our state constitution. And so here we were debating something that was already the law in Utah. Not only was already the law in Utah, but we had lived with it at that time for almost 80 or 90 years, and it hadn't caused all the problems that everybody anticipated it was going to cause. And so the focus of the study changed from whether we should enact the Equal Rights Amendment to implementing it based on our Utah Constitution. And so we did, and actually became one of the states leading in the United States in making sure that there really was equal rights in the law, and went through and amended our whole. And so a lot of the work that I did is going through our code and our laws to make sure that it really did provide equal opportunity and equal rights. And then from there, the legislature hired me, and eventually they hired me and appointed me as legislative general counsel for the legislature. legislature. My time in the legislature, after about 8 years, a man that I grew very close to, Norm Bangerter, who was Speaker of the House, ran for governor. When he was elected governor, he asked me to be his chief of staff and legal counsel, and so I had an opportunity. I had worked with the Attorney General's office, and now I'd worked with the legislature. Now I had the opportunity to go in the governor's office during the mid-'80s, early and mid-'80s, and be chief of staff and legal counsel to a governor and look at the law in a little different perspective, not so much in writing the laws, but in carrying them out and the impact of the laws on people. I mean, in a governor's office, you look at it differently. And so I had a wonderful opportunity to do that. I left to then go back into the private practice of law, and after 4 years I decided, probably under the influence of Uncle Jess, to apply, and it was Governor Bangerter that appointed me to the bench, and I served for 18 years on the bench. Before I went to law school, my undergraduate work had been in psychology and counseling and clinical psychology, and so I had studied that. During the Vietnam War, as happened to a lot of people, I ended up in the military instead of going on to medical school. There was a time when you went in, and so I served in the military. And during my time in the military, I got commissioned and was involved in the Medical Service Corps and eventually became a counselor. And because of all the drug problems in Vietnam, I became a drug counselor. And so I dealt with a lot of the people coming back in the military and really sort of had, for a young man that had grown up in Idaho, a real awakening about how serious the drug problem is and how it can take over people's lives and the terrible impact that it can have on people. And so and in that process, I worked with the law in the military, and I worked with the law of the JAG Corps, and it was that process of the law and trying to help people that I really decided to go to law school. I mean, and so I took the LSAT exam while I was in the military, did really well, applied to law school, got accepted, and so when I got out of the military, I went to law school. When I first became a judge in 1992, there were just 2 of us serving here in Davis County, and there were about 400 felonies, and so we each had we did a lot of other things, but we each had about 200 felonies, and of those 200 felonies that we each had, about 100 were serious drug cases involving, at that time, cocaine, heroin, but it wasn't a serious problem. I lived in a pretty quiet community here in Utah. But in the mid-1990s, methamphetamine hit, like it did all over the United States. And all of a sudden, the outbreak and the cases, within 2 or 3 years, we were up over 1,000 cases in Davis County, the 2 of us, and probably 800 of them were felony drug cases involving methamphetamine. It became a real epidemic. And as a judge, I did what a lot of judges at the time did and what our legislature did. We decided that we had an epidemic and a problem, so we were going to solve it by really correcting these terrible drug users. And so we punished them. You know, we sent them to jail, we sent them to treatment programs. If they had a second offense, we sent them to jail longer and a longer treatment program. But as a judge, I became very disillusioned because what I was finding is that, you know, I would send people to jail and 10% of them, for whatever reason, stopped using drugs and didn't come back into the system. But 90% of the people that I was sending to jail and treatment programs were coming back, and at a great cost to us. I mean, it was costing us $30,000 to $50,000 a year to house them in a jail, and the treatment programs we were paying for. I would send them, and no matter how many times I did this, it seemed like at any level, 90% would keep coming back. And so I said, you know, there's got to be a better way.